Well, top of the morning, people. Good to see you. You guys are good, man. You're good. And I'm excited this morning. It is beautiful outside. You are here, and I'm wearing my Cobra Kai shirt. So strike first, strike hard, no mercy. Yes, sir. All right. So we're going to have a good time this morning. If you're somebody in the room that knows Jesus, you're a follower of Christ, I think this is going to be something that is a great reminder for you. And if you're somebody that's checking us out, you would not consider yourself a Christian, I think today is a great Sunday to be a part of kind of making that investigation, because this is going to be all about the center point for us in our faith. What is most important, and in that, what is sometimes easy to lose sight of. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pray and kind of tee the ball up here so we can drive it down the fairway and have a great time as we're reminded of a great truth. So let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, I am so grateful of reminder. I find that in my life, there's many things I've studied or I know or I've heard or I'm familiar with, but then I easily forget those things, and I just get busy with life and, whatever the tyranny, the urgent is, and it's great to just get that recalibration that takes us back to not only what is central, but what is satisfying in that centrality, right? That we're not talking about some hard, bite down, dutiful thing, but rather we're talking about the very essence of what unlocks abundant life. And so I pray today that you will work in us and stir us to kind of getting maybe back on track if we're off track a little bit, that you will take us deeper if we have deeper things to move into, but we're just looking to you to show up in very big ways today. And so I am grateful and I'm humbled by the power of your grace in our lives, and I pray that we would just live in that grace. So we thank you and praise you in your perfect name. Amen. So I have been in pastoral ministry for 25 years. I've been a Christian for a little longer than that. And if there's anything that I tend to do is kind of analyze the general kind of ebb and flow of the Christian life and the things that are a little easier to slide into, and then how we try to course correct to get back onto the best, most important things. And what I've discovered over the course of all of these years, that it's very easy to find one of two kind of trajectories or paths as we live out our faith as modern day Christians. Now, one path is that you come to Christ, and initially you're really excited, you're pumped, this is awesome, but then you kind of fall into this pattern where it's a little bit like, hey, because Jesus paid it all, right? It's the song we sing. I don't earn heaven. I don't earn my relationship to God. I don't earn my salvation, as we say. It's easy to fall into that because I don't really earn anything. I'm just going to sort of coast, right? And so I have other priorities, other things kind of absorb my time. And so Jesus is important, but I'm just sort of just, not overly driven because again, I'm forgiven. I'm going to heaven. I'm good enough. And that's maybe one pattern. It's a little bit kind of the laissez-faire pattern. The other pattern I find as being really popular is the one that's very dutiful, right? And very ethics-based and very responsible. And there's a lot of self-discipline kind of embedded into that particular path. And so there's a lot of that kind of like, no, I'm going to be a good, solid, responsible Christian. I'm going to work really hard to make sure I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. Now, of those two paths, I would say early on in my own Christian faith, I was more that dutiful path, right? And so I was trained and reared at a church that was very Bible-driven, very much about the Lordship of Christ, very much about having good, responsible ethics in your Christian faith. And so that was my path. And yet it was interesting, as I went down that road and I was studying the Bible and really immersed in theology and doctrine, I remember I had this season where I'm like, is this it though? Like, I'm doing all the stuff, I'm memorizing all the texts, I'm really committed to good, solid Christian theology, but it started to feel kind of empty, as though if this is what you do your entire life, it just seems like it's more and more responsibility and more kind of function, but there wasn't something inside me that was like, wow, this is the best ever. So I would read this passage like in John 10:10 where Jesus says, I'm going to give you life abundant, off the chain, crazy, radical life. And I'd be like, that's nice, but that wasn't my experience. My experience was you're just a good, solid, dutiful Christian. And then one day I was introduced to a book, and the book captured my attention right from the get-go. The book's title was Desiring God. The subtitle was Meditations of a Christian Hedonist. And I remember going, wait, you can't have Christian and hedonist together. A hedonist is a pervert, right? Like a hedonist is somebody that's just driven for reckless pleasure. You can't be Christian and hedonistic unless you want to be on this other path in the craziest way possible. And so I started to read this book, and then it kind of resonated with me. Here's a man, John Piper, loves God, loves the Bible, loves theology, but man, he had passion oozing out of his life. He had this drive to know God in deeper, more profound ways. And for me, it was like this whole new world was open where it was like, wait, we should drive to have the deepest pleasures met in our lives, but they're to be met in the presence and power of God. And one of the conclusions he has in the book is that our problem as Christians is not that we struggle with seeking pleasure too much. And as human beings, he says that's not our problem. We seek pleasure too much. He says our problem is we settle for lesser pleasures. We settle for the lesser things. We don't want to actually put the work in to climb the tree to get the best fruit at the top. We'll just settle for the fruit that falls on the ground. It's a little jacked up, rotten. There's a worm inside, but hey, it's still sweet. Right? And so we go for lesser pleasures. Those pleasures can be sexual pleasures, monetary pleasures, vacation pleasures, just whatever earthly entertainment, bodily pleasures, or even as Christians, we can settle for more pure pleasures, but they're still lower than the chief pleasure, which is the enjoyment of the presence of God in our daily lives. We struggle to press in to that. And yet what I have found as I have been touched by that book and then read the Bible through the grid of desiring God, I've come to this radical, clear conclusion that God's passion for us is to realize that he is the greatest delight and enjoyment in life. And if we can kind of cross over into that place, if we can get to that mental location where we're like, no, more than anything else, God will satisfy me. If we can reach that stage in life, man, it changes everything. It causes you to actually believe John 10:10. Right, where he says the enemy came to kill and steal and destroy, and he's going to use all the fruit on the ground to try to kill, steal, and destroy your life. He's going to let you settle for lesser pleasures and then always be discontent. But Jesus says, my mission statement was to give you life and life abundant. Jesus said elsewhere, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You're right. And he doesn't just mean that as a platitude. What he's saying is, I want you to have real, reckless, radical, just crazy, awesome life. I want you to have that. That's why we say as a church that life is better with Jesus. We're saying every part of life is better with Jesus. The hard parts of life are better with Jesus. The awesome parts of life are better with Jesus. I've learned that from Paul reading Philippians. Here's a guy that's like, you know what? When things are going good, I'm content. When things are falling apart, I'm content. I'm like, why? And he's like, because I've got the presence of God in my life. Through Christ, I can do all things. There is a stabilizing force with me where life is just better. Because God's presence is active in my daily space. Now, I go off on that big ranting introduction. Because what we're looking at this morning totally drives this issue home. And so if you have a Bible, you can go to the second piece of literature in your Bible. We call them books inside this one book, the Bible. The second piece of literature, the book of Exodus. And we're looking at chapters 33 and 34. Or if you have our app, we have notes inside the app. You can follow along. All the verses are going to be right in there for your education, but hopefully more for your stimulation. Right? For you to start thinking through, man, where does my life center? And am I as pleasure-seeking as God would have me to be, or do I settle for lesser pleasures? Now, to get us back up to speed really quick, because these chapters sort of interlock together, they're Legos. We don't want to just kind of have the Legos pried apart and not pay attention to their unification. In chapter 33, we saw the problem. Right? The earlier chapters were all about God pursues, God grabs, God rescues, and the people that he rescues, they rebel. Right, and so chapter 32, they decide, you know what, Moses has been out of the camp for a little while. He's busy with God doing something. God isn't really on the scene right now. Let's make ourselves this platinum bovine, this little baby calf out of gold, and we're going to worship that. And God's like, that's a bad idea. It's going to hurt really bad. And so then God comes in, and he brings his kind of wrath to bear on their rebellion. right? He takes them to the woodshed. He spanks them for their offense. And at the very end of that chapter, verse 35, it says, then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made a calf, the one that Aaron had made. So the way the chapter ends is there's some level of pain involved because they still hadn't really broken in their spirit. They hadn't fully owned their sin. Now, we tend to think of a plague as always being a bunch more carnage and death. It doesn't say anybody died in the plague. It could have just been a famine. It could have just been a time of suffering. But it's meant to recalibrate them, to get them to pull their head out of the sand and look to their God again. That's the agenda. But they're still in this state of kind of stubbornness and rebellion because they're awesome at that. And so from that, it goes into chapter 33. And it says, then the Lord said to Moses, and there's a major shifting of gears here. The Lord said to Moses, depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt to the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, to your offspring, I'm going to give your old homestead. He says, I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out all of the different kind of squatters that have ended up in your homeland, right? Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but here's what you have to know. I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. Now, the first place I want to start with this passage, we're going to unpack it here in just a second, but I want us to look at the very first point in your notes. And this is so important for us to embrace, even as modern followers of Jesus. It is the emptiness of blessing without the blesser. It is the emptiness of blessing without the blesser. So no sooner does God say, I've brought some punishment to the rebels and everything else. He starts to outline, but I'm still in this game with you guys. I'm still in it with you in a different sort of way. Now, there's some things in that passage we just went through that I think are worth highlighting. First of all, he looks at Moses and says, the people that you have brought up. Right? It's a little bit like when I call my wife. I'm like, hey, honey, how's it going? And I can hear the tone in her voice. And she's like, well, you won't believe what your son did. It's not her son, it's my son, right? You know, like things are bad when it's not your kid, you're not taking ownership, it's your spouse's kid, right? And in the same way, God's like, well, these are your kids right now, Moses. Right? I mean, I know I brought them up, but they're still stubborn and they think you did it and they did it and it's all about them and everything else. So here's the deal. They're in your lap. But even though I've had to punish them, even though I've had to plague them due to their sin, here's what I'm going to do. I'm still going to follow through. I'm still going to follow through. And so what he says is, first off in this, as you go, you're going to go up to the land and there's going to be an absence of threat. An absence of threat. He says, I am going to drive out the Canaanites and the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and Suburbanites and Trilobites. And I'm going to drive them all out. All the bites are going to be driven from the land. So you're going to have, in that sense, security. More than that, he says, I am also going to provide abundance. You're going into the land, and there you're going to find a place flowing with milk and honey. See, if you go back to Genesis, we see that there was Eden, and Eden was lost, and the result of Eden being lost was thorns and thistles that they would contend with. And in a strange sort of way, God's like, going back to your homeland is a little bit like going back to Eden. It's not going to be thorns and thistles, it's going to be milk and honey. And so what God is ultimately proposing to them is, listen, when you get back to the land, you're not going to find a recession. You're not going to have problems with supply and demand. The stock market's going to be strong. National security is going to be great. There's not going to be any environmental fatigue. I mean, when you go back to this space, life is going to be bliss for you. It's going to be bliss by all external measure. Safe and secure borders, right? Assurance, a fertile soil. But there's only one thing you got to know. I will not be with you. I won't be with you. In fact, he actually says in verse 2, I will send an angel. See, typically in this time in the Israelites' history, an angel of the Lord, there was always this title, right? Or the angel of the Lord would lead them. And a lot of theologians see the angel of the Lord as sort of this idea of Jesus before he came into the world. Like before his incarnation, he was leading the Israelites. But here God's like, it's not the angel of the Lord, it's an angel. It's like God's like, all right, they're dumb. We're not going to go with them. Who's that guy that's always sweeping the gold streets? Hank the angel? You know, we'll grab Hank the angel. Hank the angel can go down and he can lead these knuckleheads because they're stiff-necked. If we send anybody else, it's just going to irritate us because they're constantly going to irritate us. But I made a promise that they're going to have security and they're going to have provision. And so we're going to follow through, but I am not going to follow along with them. See, I think that's interesting. Where God says, I'm going to give you a lot, but I'm going to hold back the best part. And the best part is me. I'm going to restrict that from you going in. Now, here's a pop quiz. And this is something that only we as individuals can take. So it's not super generic. It's meant for every one of us to think about this. But do I, as individuals, actually look at the story and believe in our gut, right? That Jesus, God the Father, the Holy Spirit, their active, powerful presence in our life is the most important part of living. Like the thing most to be desired. Do we genuinely, deeply believe that? In other words, if God came to us and said, here's the deal. I'm going to guarantee safety for your family. I'm going to guarantee money in your bank account all the time. But with that, I'm not going to really show up much in your life with my presence. What would be our response to that? What our response, just deep inside, you have to analyze this in yourself. Deep inside, would you be like, no, God, I don't want that. I would rather be poor and at risk, but have you than have wealth and security and not. Would that be our answer? No, take away all the things that give me earthly comfort. I just want you. Would that be our response? Or would our response be, okay. Because, man, security is great. Right? And money, that makes the world go round. We know that, and that brings all kinds of opportunity. And if you're not in my life necessarily, but I have those other two things, okay, I'm good enough. Good enough for me. I mean, how would we look at that? How would we answer the question? Right? Would we be desperate for God, seeking him, driven for the presence of God in our life? Or would we be more apt to be like, no, I'm content, I'm distracted, I've got other priorities in life, and so I think having security and monetary provision is good enough. Would I settle for lesser pleasures? Or would I be like, no, man, I need a deeper pleasure. I know those things are going to satisfy and aren't going to fulfill. See, I posed the question that way because here's the deal. We already know the answer in our lives. The answer is, if we're already living as though security and provision is more important. In other words, we're living in such a way that we put more time into security, more time into provision. We worry more about security and more about provision than we do about the presence of God in our life. Then we've just answered the question for ourselves. This is what we would do. Whatever we're currently doing is really how we answer that question. In other words, if I go to church on Sunday and I have my Bible and then the rest of the week it sits on my table at home, or it never leaves my car. It just goes between the bucket seats, right? If I never kind of approach it to experience God, then maybe that's telling me that, you know what, I'm more apt to be concerned about my security and my provision than I am about the presence of God. If I find that I only pray when I'm called upon to pray for meals or circumstances or situations, but there isn't this longing in me for more of him, perhaps that's going to be the challenge that I have in life. See, what's strange in all of this is that if you have security and you have provision, but you don't have God, you don't actually get to truly enjoy security or provision, right? You may have it, but you don't have the opportunity to enjoy it because the blessings of God without the presence of God, it doesn't fulfill. It doesn't have lasting fulfillment, right? And I'm going to give you an example of proving that. We live in the United States of America, right? Great country. It's a great country. We have all kinds of wealth. We have all kinds of security, right? You simply look at a map and you see it, right? We've got giant bodies of water on each side. So from the east and the west, we are massively secure in comparison to many places on earth, right? Huge security. And then to the north, we have Canada, right? 1 ship, 3 Jeeps, right? Like, we're safe. To the south, we have Mexico. They're like, let us make you margaritas and enjoy our coastline. Like, we have lots of security. And then you look at our prosperity as a culture. We have tons of prosperity. I mean, think about it. You get to go home today and you have running hot and cold water into your home. You have pipes that take away all the refuse out of your home. You have heat in the winter. You maybe have an air conditioner in the summer. And if you do, please let us know so we can come visit often, right? You have a refrigerator that handles everything. You have a pantry that's full of food. You have high-speed internet. You can just go to Amazon and in 2 days get anything you want with Prime, right? You have crazy, reckless, abundant provision. You are, in essence, what God promised Israel, you and I, right? Just, hey, you have security, you have prosperity. Now, what's interesting in all of that to me is for all of our security and our prosperity, you know what Americans seem to lack? Contentment, peace, a sense of satisfaction. No, it's like we're always looking for the next thing. I mean, you think about it. When Safeway pulled the self-checkout stuff, we flipped out. We didn't know what to do with ourselves. I'm not going there anymore. I'm going to QFC, man. I got to wait 6 minutes in line for food. Forget it, right? And then they put them back in. We're like, oh. Finally, the gods have spoken and given us our self-checkout back. Now I can be in peace, right? But no, man, we struggle with depression and anxiety and fear and all this stuff. And so that's the irony. The irony is we have all that anybody in human history would have ever wanted, and it does not satisfy if you just want the blesser or the blessing without the blesser. You're just never going to experience what it is that they're trying to offer. You need more. Because there's this sharp, simple reality that security and prosperity without intimacy just leaves us empty. We hunger for validation, right? Those things aren't going to validate. We long for contentment. Those things aren't going to bring contentment, not until we reconnect with the ultimate provider. And so those things can bless us for a season, right? So, you can get a new car, and at first it's like, this is so great, and this is so awesome. But then pretty soon you're like, I'm looking at other new cars. Right? So that just the blessing doesn't keep you filled up. You can go on a vacation. That was so awesome, so fun, lots of memories, great pictures, post them all over social media, and then you come back and what are you doing? You're looking for the next vacation because it just doesn't hold. You need the next thing, right? And so God says, you know what? You're going to have the stuff. You're going to have all that you want, but I'm not going to be there with you. I'm just not. And here's the response of the people when they hear this. It says in verse 4, when the people heard this disastrous word, it was a disastrous word to them. They mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. See, they may be a stiff-necked, sinful, selfish group of people, but they know what their life was like without God, and they know what their life is like with God. And so the prospect of God saying, you know what, I'm not showing up. I'm not going to roll into your dojo and hang out with you. They're like, nope, that's not what we want. This is where they start to repent finally, right? They have been stubborn through chapter 32. 33, God's like, okay, I'm pulling back. And that's finally when they decide to press in. Because you know what? Here's the deal. While the presence of God was terrifying to them, we learned that back in chapter 20. It was terrifying. The prospect of God not being around was completely just petrifying. Like they couldn't even fathom that. They're, no. God may terrify us, but he comforts us. God may be powerful and to be feared, but he is also safe and to be desired, right? He's reassuring. And the reason is something we actually see starting in verse 8. It's something that they would experience on a regular basis, and it kind of gives you a context for why they're suddenly going, this is a disastrous word. It says, whenever Moses went out to the tent, there was this thing called the tent of meeting. It's not the same as what they're going to build. We'll see next week, called the tabernacle, big fancy thing. But this was a place where Moses would go out of the camp and he would meet with God. And in the daytime, there would be a pillar of smoke. And at night, there would be a pillar of fire to represent the presence of God. And he would speak to God face to face, right? So Moses would go out to this tent, and all the people, they would rise up, it says. And each would stand at his tent at the door and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. And when Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud, that's in the daytime, or the pillar of fire at night, standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and they would worship each at his tent. In other words, when God's presence was manifest, right, there was this comfort that would sweep through the camp. They just felt restful, and from that were worshipful, and it was spontaneous. For all of their hardness and stiff-neckedness, when God's presence was manifest, they'd be like, whoop, man, we just feel better about things. So the idea that that wouldn't show up anymore flips them out. So that's what's motivating them to be so discouraged about this whole thing. And it's interesting because even though it was outside of the camp, right? So they would look down away and they would see this thing going on. Even though it was outside, inside the camp, there was peace because they knew God was there. It reminds me of when I was a kid. I grew up in Arizona, in the desert of Arizona, in kind of a secluded part of central Arizona. And in the desert, everything is developed to be cruel and mean. Right? So the animals are mean, the bugs are mean, the plants are mean, everything has claws and stingers and teeth, right? And we would then camp out in that, right? So as a kid, like I'd be like 8, 9, 10 years old, we lived in this low-income apartment complex, and me and a friend or two, we would put a camp in the open field behind our apartments, maybe about 100 yards from the apartments. Right? That was our way of being men who were adventurous at 9 years old. This was in a different time when parents didn't wrap us in bubble pack, right? So we would stay out in the tent overnight, but there was only one critical condition, right? Being 100 yards from the apartments. My mom needed to make sure she left the porch light on and the lights inside the apartment on, right? And so I had no problem being 100 yards away. As long as I could see the light to the apartment, I was fine. As soon as, for some reason, she would forget and turn the lights off in the house and light off on the porch, it was a completely different game, right? And suddenly, I was this freaked out 10-year-old kid in the tent, like, Mom, the lights are off, right? And I had a flashlight with me, but my own light is not the same as the light of the apartment. And the reason is because I always knew the light there has people there who are stronger, have more authority, give me more security and hope than my little flashlight in my tent. So as long as the light was on, I was good. Even though it was outside of my camp, I had security. I had peace. It was great. As soon as the lights were off and I was left with my little own flashlight, I'm like, this is not the same. Whatever comes into my tent, I'll beat it with my light before it eats me. All right, this is great. Our own light doesn't count. Only God's matters. That's what matters to them. And so what they know is that his presence is more fulfilling than any surplus or security or situation that they could have apart from him. And the reason is because, number 2, the presence of God is the tipping point for abundant living. The presence of God is the tipping point for abundant living. We are just going to be restricted from a truly fulfilling life apart from the presence of God. It doesn't matter how much stuff we amass, how many experiences we have, how many people we know. It's all still going to be incomplete, right? So no sooner does Moses hear that God says, I ain't going. The people hear God ain't going. That Moses goes to God, and he says this in chapter 33, verse 15. If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. If you're not rolling with this posse, don't even bother. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us so that we are distinct, I and your people, from all the other people on the face of the earth? He says, you know what, it doesn't matter how fiercely secure or filthy rich we are. If you're not with us, we look no different than anybody else. No different. There is no distinctive difference between the Egyptians or the Babylonians and your people. We all just look the same, and there's nothing impressive about that. Nothing, right? Because there's this truth, and it's this truth that I keep trying to drive home, that only God can truly satisfy us in the things of life. Only God can give a robust, abundant life to make us truly and compellingly different. That's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that counts. Our ethics, right? Christian ethics, being good Christian people, are not enough to be compelling. Those ethics are not enough. Our creeds, for all their beauty and symmetry and creativity, are not enough for us to be compellingly different in our world. The only thing that matters is God's presence and God's power that is played out in our everyday faithfulness, our everyday diligence to experience Him. That is the only thing that will make us distinctly different. See, this is why as a church, we make such a big deal about built, not born, being followers in training, right? We did that whole series in the fall, and we're going to continue to remind you, as to remind myself, that we are in training every single day. We have to approach the day as though we are going into the gym, right? We're going to have the right diet, right exercise to have the right output here. And so we are followers in training. Every day we're waking up, Jesus, what do you want? How do you want to do it? How can I press into you more and seek you more so you do this through me more? Like, that's our jam right there, right? That's important to us. Or last week, we talked about everyday faithfulness, right? That constant, just like continued management of our faith, because maintenance matters. See, this is the stuff that we are to have, right? If we are not experiencing the presence of God, right? Being in that relentless, strong-willed, determined, obsessive pursuit of a higher hedonism, we're not going to be different. We're not going to be different. And that's what I'm convinced of the world needs to see. They need to see Christians that are different. They need to see followers of Christ who are different. And our difference is not going to be us complaining about the woes of society. It's not going to be what we're against. It's going to be how we are clearly emulating something unanticipated, something otherworldly, because we are connected to a God that is dramatically different than what people see in the world. See, what this means for us is that we need to be desperate for more of Him, desperate to seek Him out. Now, in doing this, I want to tell you, it's not all sunshine and fudgesicles, all right? Sometimes the pursuit of God is hard, like really hard. Sometimes the pursuit of God is frustrating or confusing, right? Because not every circumstance in life is just so blissful that it makes pursuing God simple. Sometimes the situations of life are very painful and really complex and really frustrating. And it's in that you still must have that everyday faithfulness. This is God. I want you to show up, and I need you to comfort me or frankly confront me, but keep me on track to pursuing you more. So, personal story. This is one of those battles that I've been in with God for a while. We've been arguing a lot, mostly on my lawnmower tractor doing my yard. This is where I get alone with God and we begin to hash out certain issues. And for me, it's been my son. My son doesn't believe in Christ, and from that, his life flows out of him not knowing Christ. And for now months, every day, I beg God many times a day, God, change my son, work in my son, stimulate his heart, bring him to you, let him see your glory, do something awesome, amazing, just rock his world, God. I beg every day. And then every day, it's the same kind of day. And so I start arguing with God. I'm like, I don't get this. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm asking for a good thing. I'm not asking for a Ferrari here. You know, I'm not asking for frivolous stuff. I'm asking for something that I thought we were both on the same page. You want people to come to you. I want people to come to you. This person matters to me. You say he matters to you. How about we get on the same page here together? Right? So just frustration. Right? Now all of that is still seeking God. But it's in one of those like kind of angry David ways, So having this hash out, and it's particularly tough being a Calvinist because like, God, you're the sovereign one, you open hearts, and I don't open hearts, but I'm going to become an Arminian if that's what we're going to do now. So I'm like, in this, well, I can play that way too, So I have all this, like stuff going on right in me, And so I'm arguing with God a lot and begging a lot. And the last week I'm in the mower and I'm begging and I'm frustrated and everything else. And it's like God just finally, after months of me, just kind of like, he's like, are you done? And it was this moment where he's like, okay, let's backtrack this for a second. Where was your son at 6 months ago? In the course of the time, where's he at now? Was he in really dark space then and things have alleviated quite a bit? Was he making some really poor decisions and now he's making wise decisions? Was he secretive and now he's transparent? Was he clouded by misjudgment and at least now you have a really beautiful relationship with him and he's not making any of those things that were destructive to his life, the central theme of his life, and he's sort of getting on track? And Matt, maybe I'm working out a story that's a whole lot bigger than you want. Maybe it's a 40-year wandering in the wilderness, but Matt, do you think that maybe I'm a little bit more in control than you of this, and I care more about him than you do? And then I'm like, oh yeah. Maybe that's right. In other words, I kept seeking the presence of God, but in frustration, but even in my frustration, there was this sense in which God's like, but you keep coming to me, that's good, and now I'm going to bring you in on a little secret. I'm working. Maybe not at your pace and not in the way you want, and you want the story really clean and simple and concise and done in a year. How many of my stories are done in a year, Matt? How many? Matt, you go through the Bible many times every year. How many of my stories are done in a year? Or done in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20? I'm like, oh man. Yeah, God knows what he's doing. Sometimes seeking the presence of God can be painful, but what that means is we continue to press, to plea for answers, connection, experience. We want more. We just keep, God, I want more. Even in our frustration, God, but give me more. Help me understand. Help me get it. And the thing is, if we do that, if we really have a determination to relentlessly seek him, you know what? He rewards that. Verse 17, this is the Lord said to Moses, this very thing that you have spoken, I will do. You want me to come with you, I'll come with you. For you have found favor in my sight. And really, he finds favor. That's really the grace of God in the life of Moses. But there's this other part. He's like, man, but you want me. I show up where I'm wanted. You don't want me. I honor your wishes. But if you want me, I'm coming. So he says, you found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. So here's what's cool about Moses, right? He still wants more, right? He's greedy for God. So I'm not going. Please come. Okay, I'll come. I want more. Now, show me your glory, he says. I want more of you. I love that. Never satisfied, never settles, right? Show me your glory, right? It's awesome. I want deeper pleasure. I want deeper satisfaction. I want deeper exploration of you. So, man, bring me in. I want to go to the pinnacle of your presence. And so God says to him, I will make all of my goodness pass before you. Moses said, show me your glory. And God says, good, I'm going to show you my goodness. You want to know what God's glory is? It's his goodness. It's his goodness. So it says, I'll show you my goodness. It's going to pass before you, and I will proclaim before you my name. See, when God says, I'm going to proclaim my name, he says, I'm going to reveal to you even more deeply my personality, who I am. So God's kind of limited even that scope for Moses. He says, but I'm going to bring you in on what really makes me tick. And with that, we see number 3, if you're taking notes, the personality of the presence of God. So there's a scene, and God says, all right, I'm gonna pass before you, but you can't look at me and live. Nobody can look at me directly and live, so you're going to kind of see me from behind, but my glory is going to be swooping into your life, and I'm going to say something as that happens. And so in chapter 34, starting in verse 5, we see it. It says, the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him, Moses, there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him, right? But again, Moses can't look. It's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. You'd melt on the spot. Can't have that. So God's shielding him still in his goodness and grace. And he proclaimed as he goes by the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But, who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. Here's what God says. I want you to notice the big laundry list. He says, if you're needy, I'm merciful. Right, so this isn't about how good we are. This is about how broken we are, right? If you're needy, I'm merciful. If you're broken, I'm gracious. If you're rebellious, man, I'm patient. If you're unfaithful, I'm abounding in steadfast love. If you are guilty, I am forgiving. He says all of this, like I'm this and this and that, all these positive qualities. He says, but if you are unresponsive or you're unrepentant, then I am just. I'm just. And I give you what you ultimately want, which is you want life apart from me. You don't want my presence. And so I'll pull that back. And if I pull that back, here's the guarantee. Life is meaningless. No matter what you have, what you accomplish, what you acquire, it is meaningless. It will be punishment in the end. Because there's the reality that life without his presence strips rest from all security. Doesn't matter how big a military, how many weapons in your home, how many locks on your door, you won't have rest. It strips enjoyment from your stuff, and it ultimately strips abundance from life. See, Moses hears this and he craves all of those forward traits. He doesn't want to waste his life. He doesn't want to waste his time with lesser satisfactions. So he just wanted more of God's presence, to see more of God's glory, which is ultimately God's goodness. And when he does, when he presses into the deepest parts of that whole equation, he is changed. Literally, physically, he is changed. And we see this with number 4 in your notes. The presence of God produces the glow of God. It says in chapter 34, verse 29, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, he came down from the mountain. Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. And the people of Israel would see the face of Moses, and the skin of Moses' face was shining, and Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went to speak with God, right? And so here's what you have. Moses is so touched by what he experiences with God. He's literally physically transformed, right? There's this whole shift that happens. But the reason he puts the veil over his face is because that glow, it begins to wear off. And he put the veil so people wouldn't be like, dude, why are you not so shiny? And he would go back into God, and he would come back out, and he'd be glowing until it started to wear off, and then he'd put the veil down again until he'd go back to God. And it would be like, so you start to get the idea. You can't just have an event with God and be like, woo, I'm going to glow the rest of my life. You must go back to the presence to really sense the power. You must go back into that inner space and be touched anew to then come out and have that fresh new sense of look and life every single day. And the same is true for us. Now, again, we're not Old Testament people. We're New Testament people, right? Jesus and everything else. So listen, here's the deal. You're not going to be a glow stick for Jesus, all right? It's not like you're going to be like, I went into my prayer closet and I came out and everybody's like, whoa, glow bug, right? So that's not what happens, but here's what I do know. People who clearly have this intimacy with Christ, they look different. They look different. There's something about them that radiates. It's just different. But you know what? It wasn't like, hey, man, they went to this Petra concert. It was awesome. They took off, and then the rest of their life, they were good. No, they have to keep coming back. The people I know that are like that, they keep coming back. In fact, they're desperate to come back because they're hedonistic. They want greater pleasure, and they found out that God is the greatest pleasure of all. So it is a self-generating, I want more, and he gives you more. I want deeper pleasure, and he gives you deeper pleasure in himself through his presence. This is a little bit of what we see for the New Testament Christian in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. What we know is that Jesus makes his presence permanent and powerful and real in our lives, right? We are now the tent of meeting or the tabernacle or the temple. God's Spirit rests within us and everything else. So he plays out in our lives. And this is what Paul says. He says our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant, new relationship, right? New contract. Not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. It says, now if the ministry of death carved in letters on stone came with such glory that the Israelites cannot gaze at Moses' face because of its glory, which is being brought to an end, will not the ministry of the Spirit have even more glory? So his point is, man, Moses brought the law. The law just says we're broken and dumb and stupid and we rebel. But Jesus came to give us life. And if Moses was just lit up over something so incomplete, how much more should we radiate in light of our completeness in Christ? We have better access. We can gaze into God in deep and profound ways, right? That's what he says. And we don't have to go out someplace outside of the camp to go to God, but rather we simply have to press into the God who is present in our lives. And so we do that by what Paul says in Galatians 5. He says, I say, walk by the Spirit. Walk by the Spirit. Verse 18, if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. And when you do this, when you're saying, man, it's about the Spirit doing it in me, when I walk in the Spirit every day and I want him more every day, what is the result? Well, you begin to radiate, or literally you naturally bear fruit. Things like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, these wonderful things that just display we're different. This is not a list of things we're supposed to go and do. This is a list of things that the Spirit will do in us as we seek to walk in and are led by him. So it doesn't mean we have to wake up every day and go, okay, what's the list? I got to love, I got to have joy, I got to have peace, and I have patience. It's not a do list. Every morning we should wake up and say, God, I want your presence in my life. I want you more. I want to enjoy you more. I want you to be my overwhelming agenda for life. I want to have a tenacity to experience more of you. And the more we do that, and all through the day, saying, work, move, guide, touch, expose me to you because you are my greatest delight, the more the Spirit just takes off in us and brings out in us this radiating of the glow of God. And the world around can look and say, wow, and that is why the gospel is different. Let's go and pray together. Jesus, thank you for reminder. Thank you for inspiration to look at the lives of people who have been touched by you and go, man, it's worth the time, it's worth the energy, it's worth the effort, it's worth the striving. We strive for such lesser pleasures, giving our time, our sleep, our money, and then they don't pay off. You will pay off every time. I pray that we see that as we see you in your good name. Amen.